Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're cutting straight to the research on one of the most common forms of self-sabotage out there. We're talking about chronic procrastination and that constant struggle to master difficult work. You shared this stack of material because you're looking for a clear, executable system, a pathway to stop the cycle of avoidance and guilt and that feeling of being utterly overwhelmed. So let's just start at the beginning. If procrastination isn't just laziness, what is the core mechanism that we're actually fighting here?
That is the most critical insight in this entire body of work. It really is.
Yeah.
So while procrastination is often, clinically defined as counterproductive and needless delay, that definition, it completely misses the driving force.
It's too simple.
Way too simple.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is that the sources reveal task avoidance is fundamentally about prioritizing short-term mood repair.
Mood repair.
Emotion regulation. It's putting that over long-term achievement. You're not avoiding the work because you're lazy. You're avoiding it because right in this moment, the thought of doing the work causes anxiety or dread, discomfort.
And your brain just wants out.
Your brain chooses the immediate comfort of escape.
Yeah.
It's an emotional management strategy that's it's going completely wrong.
And that choice to escape, it just creates this truly devastating negative
spiral.
It's a total spiral, yeah.
Yeah.
As a chronic procrastinator, you end up surrounded by missed deadlines, chaos, and just that constant hum of anxiety and hopelessness.
Mm-hmm. And you default to the easy stuff.
Always. You feel busy, you make those excuses like, oh, I need to check my email before I start. But really, you're just shoveling the important things onto the I'll do it later pile.
And we have to emphasize the immense, often irreparable long-term damage this short-term comfort-seeking actually causes. There's this startling anecdote in the source material. The author recounts needing to pay a simple $600 credit card bill, but it required a brief trip across town. Just that one minor effort.
And that was the trigger.
That was a trigger for avoidance.
Yeah.
And the consequence wasn't just, a late fee. The procrastination spiraled until both of his credit cards were canceled.
Wow.
Leading to a total loss of credit clearance. This illustrates a crucial psychological truth. Choosing escape right now it's incredibly expensive later.
That perfectly captures the trap. So if the core problem is avoidance rooted in emotion, we have to identify the emotions we're trying to regulate. The research points to 5 core fears, but the one that really stands out, the one that defines this whole struggle, is the fear of discomfort. Why is that obsession with avoiding discomfort the single biggest barrier to change?
Well, because every meaningful change, every single significant goal requires sustained, repetitive discomfort. It just does. So if you're conditioning yourself to believe that discomfort is an emotional state that has to be escaped immediately,
You'll never start anything hard.
you will naturally fail to initiate any behavior that promises difficulty, whether that's starting a diet, writing a demanding report, or even, making a required phone call. And speaking of fears, we should probably integrate another common form right here.
Okay.
It's called decisional procrastination. This is when the fear of making the wrong decision, that fear of future regret, it leads to paralysis.
And you just spin your wheels researching.
Exactly. You waste days, weeks, months agonizing over options. And it feels like work, but it's really just avoidance. It's avoiding judgment and commitment.
So we've diagnosed the root cause, fear, and this kind of emotional avoidance. To sustain that, the mind relies on coping mechanisms, right? What are the most common tricks our brains use to keep up the illusion that we're being productive?
The sources highlight 2 very subtle ones: distraction and denial.
Distraction seems pretty obvious.
It is. That's the instant gratification hit of, endlessly checking social media or streaming something. But denial is much more insidious. Denial means engaging in unnecessary low-value activities while convincing yourself that you're preparing or being effective.
Like organizing your desk for 2 hours before writing a proposal.
The desk that didn't even need organizing. Or calling 3 friends for motivational advice and losing the whole morning to conversation. You use the low-stakes activity to justify the high-stakes avoidance.
Right.
But what's fascinating, though, is that the anxiety you feel about the major task, it's actually a perfect diagnostic tool. That anxiety is your brain saying, this is important, do it now.
So you have to learn to see that feeling as a trigger for action, not flight. Okay, so we've established the diagnosis. It's not a moral failing, it's a learned behavior. And the good news is, if it's learned, we can unlearn it. But that means adopting new principles and, critically, taking total ownership for the change. And that starts with what the sources call self-forgiveness. But once we forgive ourselves for past behavior, how do we actually operationalize a fresh start?
We combat that initial massive resistance by focusing entirely on momentum, just getting started. The key here is twofold: applying the principle of starting small and deliberately time blocking, just 5 minutes to engage the task.
Why just 5 minutes? What makes that specific number so powerful psychologically?
It's because 80% of the difficulty of any task is concentrated right in that first moment, in the resistance, the dread, the overthinking phase. Your brain is generating immense energy trying to stop you from starting because it anticipates all this future discomfort. The 5-minute rule is basically a psychological hack.
You're kind of tricking your anxiety.
You're telling your anxiety, look, we are only doing this long enough for the feeling of dread to go away. Committing to something ridiculously small, like writing one headline or doing one set of push-ups, it tricks the brain into believing the action is inconsequential.
But then you've started.
But once you break that initial inertia, the energy starts moving forward, and the brain shifts its emotional state almost instantly from dread to active involvement and confidence. And that momentum often carries you way past the initial 5 minutes.
That initial push makes sense for breaking inertia. But what about tasks that need sustained effort over weeks? The sources really stress the need for external pressure, for accountability. Why is relying on willpower alone just such a catastrophic failure for chronic procrastinators?
Because willpower is an inexhaustible resource. It runs out.
Yeah.
And when you're trying to change these deeply ingrained habits of seeking comfort, your internal negotiation skills they're impeccable.
You'll always let yourself off the hook.
Always. You will always give yourself an easy pass. And that's why the source material emphasizes the principle of external accountability. When you tell someone else, a coach, a friend, a partner, that you are doing something, you're introducing external urgency and expectation.
Right. It's not just you anymore.
You're not only worried about the task, you're now worried about disappointing or failing to report to another person. This leverages social pressure to maintain effort, which is essential because, as the source notes, even highly successful people rely on this. It takes the decision out of your hands when you're most vulnerable.
Okay, moving from external controls to internal ones. Even when we are committed and accountable, the modern world it's packed with internal distractions. How do we fight back when our brain gets bored and wants that instant gratification hit?
This is where we learn to train our cognitive functions to interrupt what the system calls impulse snaps.
Impulse snaps.
An impulse snap is that sudden, random, urgent thought. The instant pull to check your phone for no reason or chase a link down a rabbit hole. It happens when your brain gets uncomfortable and wants a fast hit of dopamine. We have to realize these urges are fleeting, and crucially, that we do not have to obey them instantly.
And the actionable technique for this it's deceptively simple. You deliberately inject a brief delay.
The delay.
Yeah. So instead of immediately grabbing the phone when the impulse hits, you teach yourself to count to 5 or 10 before reacting.
That delay creates this vital cognitive wedge. It's an exercise in mental conditioning that it interrupts the urgency loop. The brain learns the impulse won't always result in instant gratification.
And that gives the logical part of your brain time to catch up.
It allows the prefrontal cortex, the planning part, to regain control before you just switch tasks. You're conditioning your mind to accept discomfort for just 10 seconds.
Okay, so that handles the negative impulses. But
Okay.
can we make the necessary tasks themselves more appealing?
Yes, we can. We can employ some positive reinforcement using a behavioral principle known as the PREMAC principle, which is often executed through temptation bundling.
Temptation bundling. I like the sound of that.
It basically leverages instant gratification to build good habits. The PREMAC principle states that a high-frequency behavior, something you love doing, can be used to reinforce a low-frequency behavior, which is something you avoid.
So you combine the two. For example, if you love listening to a specific podcast or audiobook, you make a rule. I'm only allowed to listen to that favorite content while I am doing the undesirable task, like cleaning out my inbox or exercising.
Precisely. You make the necessary task the gateway to the desired reward. It reduces the friction because you're substituting that feeling of dread with anticipation for the thing you actually want to do.
And finally, we have to consider the environment itself. The sources are very clear that your environment is either your greatest ally or your greatest enemy. What does it mean to program your environment with motivational visual triggers?
It means making conscious decisions to arrange your space to support the behavior you want and to eliminate the behavior you are trying to unlearn.
So if clutter creates mental chaos, organize the desk.
Immediately.
Yeah.
If social media is the negative trigger, put your phone in another room. Use software to block sites. You use visual cues goals written on sticky notes, a priority list taped next to your monitor as physical, persistent weapons that force your brain to remember the commitment every single time your eye catches them.
The environment becomes an extension of your discipline.
Exactly.
This has been a true restructuring of how we view task avoidance. We've established that procrastination is rooted in fear and emotion regulation, and the solution requires, well, total ownership. It requires breaking resistance with that 5-minute start, managing impulse snaps through cognitive delays, and making hard tasks more desirable through temptation bundling.
Before we close, let's just quickly revisit decisional procrastination. It often stems from that fear of failure or not making the optimal choice. But you have to remember that even when you're paralyzed by the difficulty of a decision, you are still making a choice.
The choice to do nothing.
The choice to do nothing and leave the outcome entirely to chance. And that choice often carries a far greater cost than making an imperfect decision and then adjusting your course later.
And that leads us directly to a key concept we saw in the research, the time inconsistency phenomenon. This is that psychological quirk where your present self constantly values immediate reward more than future reward, even though you know the future reward is more beneficial. We choose comfort now, assuming our future self will happily handle the bill.
Yeah, future me will deal with it.
Exactly. So as you reflect on this deep dive, the future will not magically improve unless you actively choose to change today. What are you currently delaying that your future self will have to pay for? And what small, intentional, 5-minute action can you take right now to start paying yourself first? We appreciate you trusting us to unpack this material for you. Until next time.